Hello everyone, my name's Betsy and I'm on the BPF Futures Advisory Board for Mentoring alongside my co-lead Cheryl. And my day-to-day role is in the London Capital Markets and Development team at Knight Frank. Just some minor housekeeping before we begin. This will be a recorded webinar which will be available on the BPF YouTube channel, details of which will be shared in our upcoming Futures newsletter. This webinar is for Futures members only, so you should all receive that shortly. The audience cameras, we're going to have them off for this webinar just for ease, but we have a Q&A box just at the bottom. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask the panel, please do so, and we'll come to that towards the end of the webinar.
Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Cheryl Effiam and I currently work at B&D Reside as a project lead, and I also sit on the BPF Futures Advisory Board as a co-lead to the mentoring strand alongside my lovely colleague Betsy, who's just introduced everybody today. We're delighted to have you here and really appreciate you taking your time out of your working day to join us as we celebrate the 2023 National Mentoring Day. So today is a day to recognise the value career guidance can have on those starting out and even those well into their career. Here at the BPF Futures, we're into our second year of our formal mentoring programme and are delighted to have many of our mentees from this year's 2023 cohort join us today. The wider BPF Futures is an effort to involve newer members of the industry in key discussions and decisions that will shape our future.
And today we're joined by three panellists who can provide fantastic insight into three very different areas of property. Firstly, we have Guy Granger, Global Head of Sustainability at JLL and our previous president here at the BPF. Secondly, we have Sarah Penlington, Senior Vice President at Lockton Companies. And finally, we have Andrew Tyler, Head of London Development at Knight Frank. We'll start with Guy, then go on to Sarah and then Andrew. If you'd just like to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your career path, how it's led you to here today.
Hi everyone, I'm Guy and I am currently Global Head of Sustainability Services at JLL. I've only been in sustainability for the last 2.5 years. And I started my career actually at niche practices, so small organizations of less than 100 people, probably for the first 20 years of my career. It seems like a long time, but in the scheme of things, probably half of my career I spent in small niche practices. Most people will probably know me now because I have been at JLL for the last 15 years. And at JLL, I was originally in retail transactions, but then performed an executive role for 8 years. And served on the global board for 5 of those years, now in a full-time sustainability role. So had quite a few different areas of expertise in property and look forward to sharing some of the experiences today.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm Senior Vice President within the real estate team at Lockton. It's an American company, so hence sort of the fancier titles, I'll be honest. Sounds a bit fancy. So I've been there for 3 years now, and so my third anniversary last week, and started actually in lockdown. But prior to that, I was at Aon for 18 years, 13 of which was in real estate. So haven't really moved around that much, stick to sort of what I know. And prior to that was project management for about 5 years, whilst I did my insurance exams at Aon. And then prior to that, after leaving university, I worked at the London Eye for a year, so it's a long time ago. So thank you for having me.
And I'm Andrew Tyler. I'm an equity partner at Knight Frank, and I head up the London development team. I did things a little bit differently to everybody else. I started my career in 1989, just as the market was crashing, and I opted to do an apprenticeship to get qualified. I went to university 1 day a week for 5 years to get my degree whilst working for British Gas within their property department. But luckily they had a long and successful history in dealing with apprenticeships, mainly for their gas fitters. I joined Knight Frank in 1997 and was asked to deal with the development function within an agency, which is quite a rare and niche opportunity. I have dealt with the weird and wonderful, from recently the relocation of Smithfield Market, advising the British Library on their new 100,000 square foot extension, and then lastly I appeared as an expert witness for the Defence, Legal and General, in a £350 million damages claim, where I spent a whole day in the witness box being questioned about my experience and valuations. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. That is really useful to hear. The first question that we have for the panel is to ask, at which point in your careers did you find that having a mentor or a soundboard or even an informal coach, at what point in your career was it most useful to you? We'll start with Guy, if that's okay.
Okay, well, probably not until quite late in my career did I experience actually coaching, which is kind of a form of mentorship, because back in the 80s and 90s, to be honest, there wasn't a lot of discussion around mentoring. So probably when I was in my late 30s and I was in a leadership position, leading a team of about 25 people, I went on a course which involved some coaching, and I found the coaching unbelievably useful, to the extent that actually once I got into a leadership position, I asked for a coach permanently. So certainly during the 8 years of executive leadership at JLL, I had a coach full-time. I don't mean full-time just dealing with me, but just I could check in with a coach all the time. I had informal mentors in terms of people I looked up to, bosses, things like that, but they were very rarely line managers. And I think the role of a mentor is very different from a manager. They're there to listen mainly. I think good mentors are really good listeners, and coaches are professionally trained listeners. So a lot of the coaches I had were actually professionally trained psychotherapists. And I found it extremely useful in a leadership position to be on the couch effectively and to have someone to be able to talk to that would listen and give me really professional feedback. So I found it a really important tool to continue to learn, because when you are being mentored or coached, it's a learning process. You're helping dealing with challenges that are in front of you, some of which might be work challenges, but some of which might be personal challenges that influence your work. So I would say from my late 30s, I started having coaching and mentoring, and it's kept up ever since, to the extent that now actually I find myself mentoring far more than I'm being mentored, and I kind of miss it. So I'm looking into actually how I can put that back into place, because I'm a great believer in continuous learning. It doesn't matter what age you are, it doesn't matter where you are in your career. Personal growth is a very fulfilling sensation, and really you can only get that through continuous learning and kind of pushing yourself into kind of new areas of interest. Like, really interesting to hear Andrew's story about being an expert witness. I was at one stage an expert witness, and I remember my boss at the time saying, "Why on earth would you decide to do that out of choice?" And it was purely because I wanted to experience something that was very unusual and pretty uncomfortable, I would have thought, Andrew, but because it was a way to learn. And I'll always look back on that experience as one that was very useful in my development.
Fantastic, and great to hear that you would like to continue being a mentee. Our applications go live next year, so I'll send you the form. Sarah, if we'd like to hear from you as well.
Yeah, of course. And I've actually never had a formal mentor in my career until very recently, actually. So a little bit like to Guy's point, you know, when I started out at Aon, it wasn't really a thing, I suppose, or it wasn't really discussed or advertised. And then I came to Lockton, and not everybody has a mentor. I think it's got to be very much, you've got to want to be a mentor and be a mentee. You know, you can't be forced into either position, which I feel quite strongly about. And I went on a work residential trip last year for a week, so quite intensive leadership course within Lockton. So it's internal, purely internal, but people from all over the UK, different businesses, but all similar sort of level, but different sort of ages, different stages in our career. And through that process, sort of talking about mentors, I thought, you know, why have I never had one? And again, to Guy's point about always learning, I think there's, you know, you never know everything. You never know, how can you? You know, there's always, yes, I specialised a long time in real estate, but there's lots I don't know, and there's lots outside of that. So actually I came back from that and sort of looked internally within Lockton, actually asked about being a mentor, and then found out we actually have a mentoring scheme, which I hadn't even been told about. So I've raised that as an issue as well. Because it was very much push now for sort of the graduate programme or apprentices, which is great, and I'm full believer in that. But actually, why can't anybody have one? It doesn't matter where you are in your career. And I often sometimes think, you can't have any regrets in life because it makes you who you are now. But if I'd had one perhaps earlier, would I have perhaps left anyone earlier, or pushed yourself a little bit more in my career? And actually, I think all my line managers previously, I worked so closely with day in, day out on, with the cases, clients, and you end up sort of just talking about the day to day and not actually me or the bigger picture. So I think, I would a huge fan of mentors and mentees. So that's why I volunteered for this programme.
Fantastic. And it's great to hear that your company have it facilitated in there. That's something we're going to touch on shortly, but it is brilliant that it is able to do it whilst at work rather than perhaps seeking it out yourself. And so finally, Andrew, we'll come to you. At what point in your career was it most helpful having a mentor or soundboard?
Well, I was really lucky because British Gas just got the whole apprenticeship thing, and so I was assigned an industry expert outside British Gas who I could discuss any aspects of my apprenticeship with. Funnily enough, I stayed with that mentor throughout the whole of my career. He's now retired, but I still catch up with him for a beer on the odd occasion. But I think that was very useful for about those aspects that really, when you reach a crossroads in your career or you're faced with a situation that you could really value someone's honest opinion, you have someone to reach out to, even if you don't want to hear what they've got to say. And I think like Guy, there's this difference between the coaching for the people who deal with specific things. So, for example, again at British Gas, you had a coach who was helping you through the business side of life rather than the actual surveying property aspects of it. And I think, Guy, touching on the that expert witness thing and that continual learning, I think that does kind of like work both ways for the mentor and the mentee. And doing things like that, you are always on that continuous learning and that continuous journey.
Absolutely. I think hearing that you have a mentor that stayed with you throughout your career really reflects what we're trying to achieve at the BPF. It's not just a one-time meeting. It's really building relationships, as is often the case in property.
Absolutely. That's quite key in actual fact. As you're probably aware, the property industry, like many other industries, is one that is built on trust and relationships, and naturally can take a number of years, as Andrew has just attested to develop and mature. And it can often feel that you're at the foot of a mountain and you're looking up in your very first few years. However, by joining communities such as BPF Futures, you will stand to benefit from being within a network that's been designed to develop and support you, our property industry leaders of tomorrow. And so I'd like to ask the panel, specifically, what are your organisations doing to encourage younger members to thrive in the industry? And what is most important to learn when you are at the very bottom, aka a newbie? And if I can direct that to Andrew, please.
Thanks, Cheryl. Knight Frank has always recognised that the graduates of today are the partners tomorrow. And I think the best example of that was Alistair Elliott, who retired 18 months ago. He'd been at Knight Frank for 39 years, having joined as a graduate, and ended up being, the senior partner for 8 years. So we very much recognise that is an absolute critical part of our business. So we have quite an extensive programme to encourage our younger members to grow themselves. And we want to ensure that they have access to, older hats such as myself, with a wealth of experience, but also so it can be disseminated for the next future generation. I think my only words of advice is that you only get out of a relationship what you put in it. And so if you're given the chance, you should use it to your maximum advantage.
Absolutely, that's really quite key to hear, Andrew. Thank you for that. So it's effectively being able to pass the baton on to the future generations. Brilliant. Sarah, could I put the same question to you, please?
Sure. So within Lockton, there's something called Ignite, which is basically for anybody aged 35 and under, so definitely not me, but any in any division, so within Lockton, and they basically host a mixture of socials or networking opportunities, or they'll have guest speakers come in, or sometimes like the CEO, if he's flying in, for example, he'll come and sort of just talk to the younger generation, which is certainly something I never, when I was at Aon, when I was first starting out, I never had exposure to any of the senior members of the board or anything like that. I wouldn't know who they were, so I think that's really good. But also just to meet other people, it's not just within your team, but other teams, like who sits across the floor there. I see them having a coffee, but let's get to know them. So I think that's really good. We do have a graduate scheme, but we've also just launched an apprenticeship scheme as well. Because obviously with life changes, yes, loads are going to university, but what about those that perhaps don't want to go to university? Or so we just launched an apprenticeship scheme, which again never existed in my day, and would have perhaps given more opportunities. And every single new starter is assigned what's called a buddy. So, but that's within our team. So that's generally one level above that person. But again, that's actually at all levels, which I think is excellent.
Brilliant. So by effectively diversifying the routes into the business, I suspect you'll also be able to diversify the pool of talent that is introduced to the business as well. Excellent. Okay. And Guy, to you, please.
I think depends on the organization. I mean, bigger organizations like Knight Frank and JLL have a lot of infrastructure to enable networking, to enable connections to be made. If you work at a smaller company, I think it's important to leverage the network channels that are available, like BPF Futures, but other member organizations. And usually for young people, there's pretty good access and pretty low cost access. I agree with the point that you just made, Cheryl, actually. There is historically, I've noticed with this industry that people tend to work in a lot of silos and network with kind of similar types of people doing similar types of work. And I think a really good skill to develop is to broaden your network, right? To discover actually what are all the career opportunities that the real estate profession provides, not just the little channel you're in, whether it's capital markets or leasing or valuation, so that actually you do have a broad network of people that might not look or do the same thing as you, right? And I think that's more important going forward than it's ever been, because actually a lot of the solutions that we need to provide in the built environment require creative thinking, and they require thinking to come from lots of different skill sets. So my great encouragement, yes, is to build your network, but don't fall into the trap of your network being just like you, right? Because that's the natural thing to happen. You naturally gravitate towards people who've got similar interests, similar types of work to you, but push those boundaries a bit to sort of make connections with different types of people doing different types of work, and that will broaden your horizons a little bit more. I'd also say we focus a lot in this industry on relationships and network. It's one of the things that keeps us in this industry because it's great fun and you meet a lot of inspiring people. But also the quality of output is really important. Don't forget that actually to progress and involves a lot of hard work, but the quality of output is really, really important as well. So network will get you so far, but the quality of work that you actually produce is also a really defining matter.
Thank you, Guy. Really important takeaways from that response. Thank you so much.
And now, as it is National Mentoring Day, we of course thought, why don't we get a little bit of mentoring within the webinar? So we have some directed questions at each panelist, starting with Guy. As I'm sure everyone also feels it, the conversation about net zero, it's at the forefront of most conversations I'm having, with investors, with the team. And it's something that it is written into policy, but it's not always written into job roles. And so, Guy, for those who are interested in ESG, how can they take it from a passion to a role? Are qualifications needed? And how did you move into the sustainability sphere?
Okay, well, for some roles, yes, there are qualifications needed. I mean, there are an amazing number of career opportunities. There is a complete undersupply of skills in the world of sustainability, but it ranges everything from the sort of technical engineering, like how buildings operate, to the consultancy world in terms of setting strategies. So there is a really, really broad range, and depending on which area you're going in, you might need more technical skills than others. But I must admit, there are a lot of learning opportunities as well out there for people to transition into sustainability roles, doing part-time courses like Andrew did, are very popular, and there are a lot of colleges, universities, higher education, technical colleges that provide that. I mean, the first thing I would say is you can upskill yourself through learning. There's lots of free available learning, and I can assure you I do many, many hours of that because the amount of material that is available. So my weekends are sort of spent reading technical reports that come out. But I would also encourage you, if you're really interested, then ask your employer, but be proactive yourself. Have a search out there in terms of what's available. Ask your employer whether they will help fund, co-fund, allow you the time to do these extra courses. Often they're sort of masters or conversion courses, so they might not take you too long. And I greatly encourage that, one, because you do learn the specialist knowledge that you need to be capable of doing that type of work. But it will also kind of confirm or deny whether this is an area of interest that you want to dedicate all of your time. But clearly for me, what's interesting for me is that I've made quite a significant career move quite late in my career, although I say that with some hesitation because I think I've got many years left. But and it's really, really ignited my the energy inside of me because I've kind of got a fire burning kind of within me now to try and solve some of the challenges, rather than kind of, well, certainly in my executive role, it felt more like a fire kind of beneath me, sort of driving me forward. So I would really encourage it because there's great career opportunities. But in the first instance, it requires you to speculate a lot of time to upskill and potentially money as well. So it is a risk. But most employers would be supportive of upskilling their staff in the area of ESG at the moment because there's a lack of understanding and a lot of complexity around it. So and many bigger employers will have a list of educational establishments they could go to. But it might be something that we could, if people are interested, that we could, BPF organization, for example, would be a good place to go and ask if you're in the BPF futures, what's available, and I'm sure we could come up with a list of options.
Fantastic. I think that's sort of a common theme that we'll have throughout this webinar today of, if there is something that you wish to move into or wish to try, you've got to put yourself forward and you've got to ask, particularly with sustainability at the minute. There's such an effort to reduce that 40% real estate impact that we have on the carbon emissions, that we really just need keen people who are willing to learn. They don't learn yet. This is the only way that they can do it. So thank you, Guy.
And so to Sarah, specifically with regards to your extensive career, you came initially from the insurance industry, but decided to specialise quite earlier on in the property or real estate. Was the choice to specialise deliberate? And if so, what advice would you give to the next generation about when is the appropriate time to venture off and specialise?
Cool. So no, I didn't choose to. It was a complete accident, I suppose, purely coincidental. So as I was saying, I started off doing project management within Aon, doing a lot of their offshoring projects, and it's sort of coming to an end. And I thought, I need to sort of plan for what am I doing, what am I interested in. So I was doing my ACAI exams at the time, which obviously sort of covers a broad range, and obviously coming from no technical insurance background whatsoever, you know, I didn't really know if I would specialise in aviation, reinsurance, you know, real estate. So towards the end, I thought, well, I'll just go into global. That sort of sounds like don't know what that is. That sounds like a bit of a catch-all. Had some sort of exciting clients. They started working with fabric. That sounds fun. Why not? But then after a week, or just towards the end of the industry first week, they said, oh, there's actually a space in the real estate team. Someone's just left. It's on their biggest accounts. They're desperate. They really need someone in quick. So I was like, oh, okay, yep, don't really know much about that either. I'll give it a go. So I went over to the real estate team, and the guy actually I ended up working with wasn't too keen. I'll be perfectly honest with you. He's like, oh, who are you? You're quite, you know, young. You've got no technical experience whatsoever. And I said, but I can do other things. I can write a report. I can talk to a client. I can talk to an insurer. I can, you know, you can teach me the rest of it. So actually, we ended up working really well. And actually, now it's through him. He's actually at Lockton. It was him actually that recommended me for the role now within Lockton. That's a long time ago. So it's very important, you know, who you meet. And yes, he wasn't an official mentor at the time, but in hindsight, actually, he taught me an awful lot. But also not to have, you know, your first opinion is often wrong. So actually, you know, you don't know everything from day one. Why would you? I think that was sort of a key takeaway for me. But if you've got the right person working with you and look at, you can do this, this, and this really well, but let's focus on these other bits that perhaps you need some help with. But to answer your second question, so I mean, I didn't choose to specialise, and for me, I'll be honest, I just enjoyed it. So I enjoyed learning more about real estate. I enjoyed there's always more to learn. So, for example, just recently within Lockton, we've introduced verticals within real estate. So there's a PBSA one, a BTR, logistics, office, etc. So I lead the PBSA vertical. Do I know everything about student accommodation? No, but I'm enjoying learning. So I'm going to all the conferences. So there's always something else that's in, you know, I think if you're interested, then go for it and why not? But also don't be afraid to take risks or to look at other opportunities. There's always a bit, you might not know all the technical bits, but you can always take what you do know and then learn the rest later.
So I think just building on what Betsy had just mentioned previously, it's about grasping opportunities as they come and recognizing and developing on the key skills that you have to then develop and grow into that opportunity or role. So, okay, really interesting. Can I just briefly put the same question to both Andrew and Guy, please? Maybe Andrew, just very quickly. Did you choose to specialise in the area that you're currently within? Although you do come across as being quite general, but you know, specific at the same time.
Yeah, it's you know, I didn't wake up one morning thinking, you know, I'm going to be a development expert. Because if I wanted to be a development expert, that's only a very small sector, and to be a development expert, you have got to be a generalist, and you've got to know lots about everything. And if I was quite honest, you know, I spotted an opportunity in the marketplace because there was very few people that were doing it, and you know, it was something that interested me. So I thought, you know, I'm just going to focus on that, learn as much of it as I can, and just be the best that I can in that field, given what I've got in front of me. So I kind of fell into it was the answer. So yeah, there we go.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. And finally to Guy, did you choose to specialise in ESG? And I know obviously you mentioned it's only quite recently that you've got into that space, but was it a conscious decision?
Yes, it was actually. So much so that I wrote a job spec and took it to my boss. So it was a very conscious decision. It kind of fitted in with what we wanted to do. I was on the global executive, so I kind of knew we had a strong strategy, and I knew that there was an opportunity to lead it. But if I go back to my early career, I spent the first 20 years of my career in retail, and that was by accident. The first job I got was at a retail specialist. Didn't know much about it. I fell in love with retail, and was advising a lot of the retailers on their location planning strategy in terms of store portfolio, and I found it absolutely fascinating. But after sort of a long period, I could see that retail was going through a tough time. It was going to be a tough area. Now, I got an opportunity to go and do something else, but many of my colleagues didn't. And I tried to enable them to move into different areas, and tried to encourage them to move into different areas like residential development, student accommodation, life sciences, sort of really booming areas where you could apply the same skills just to a different sector. And I could sense a resistance. People had felt that they built up all this value and knowledge into a specific sector. So even though the sector was going to be actually a tough one to work in, they would rather stay in it than risk moving to another sector. And I just encourage people, a lot of your skills are transferable, even if you think that you're a specialist. So don't trap yourself too much, because you could find that if you're not in a general role, like Andrew, then you could get trapped. And if the market changes for whatever reason, then you might be limited in terms of your opportunities. So right now the market's going through quite a bit of disruption. It's a good opportunity to reassess and think, actually, could there be another sector, another area of business that I could transfer my skills to? And whilst it might mean like a step back or a step down initially, that in the long term it could be. And I actually think that's a really healthy thing to do. When I was moving companies when I was younger, it wasn't necessarily always just for a salary increase. It was for the opportunity in the medium term. Sometimes I took a step backwards, but got into a better environment from which I could grow. So I'd say manage those sort of short-term sort of pain decisions with long-term growth opportunities, because it's really important to think longer term in terms of career development.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So I think from what I gathered, it's quite critical to also keep your ear to the ground almost, keep open to opportunities and continue to develop those relationships and those networks, because as you say, the landscape may change over time, and having the information and those established relationships will enable you to make a change if needs be. So really, really important advice. Thank you.
Great. And now to Andrew. So as we just touched on, you have quite a wealth of knowledge on some very tricky parts within the development sector, have been called on to act as an expert by your clients. And these include governmental bodies, institutions, and developers. So if you were starting again, if you were right back in the next generation, how would you best prepare yourself to lead on to become an expert? And what did you do in your early years at the beginning, which first set you up to do it?
Thanks, Betsy. As I said, I kind of sort of fell into this role, and that was really because I really wanted to understand what the whole development piece was about, and so I think, sort of firstly, you've really got to have a passion for what you want to do, and I think like as you mentioned, Guy, you wrote your own job specification because that was something that you wanted to do. And I think that is how you drive yourself to become an expert in it. You look at everything that's involved with that particular area, and then you go and research it, and you find out how you can upskill yourself. And, if there is an area, you develop it by going to seminars, webinars, online courses, doing further education, making use of the BPF and other organizations for that dissemination of sort of information. So one specific thing I can think of, I was asked by a client to help him out with some valuations on a very niche area called rights of light in development. I had no idea about rights of light, so I made it my point about digging up the relevant information, the books on it. And then in my commute in the morning on the train, 30 minutes, reading the books, reading the articles, reading all the latest case laws, so that when it came to it, I could have a practical application. And, looking at that, then I thought, well, is there any relevant industry groups that I could join? And yes, there was. And so I think it's searching out those, and that really sort of key point that was mentioned earlier, those long-term sort of relationships, because that is what you need to sort of progress with this. And at sometimes it might seem like it's an extra burden, and you're doing your day job, yet you're doing all this other stuff that you really don't need to do, and so you're kind of doing that to progress yourself. But I can assure you that, in the long run, it pays absolute dividends. And I sort of keep coming back, and Sarah mentioned, dealing with PBSA, and we deal with BTR and life sciences. These are all new areas. So you've got to have that continual learning process, no matter where you are in the industry, whether you're just starting or you're like us, you've been in here for sort of quite a while. And I think some sort of advice really is that it may seem daunting going into to a new area and offering to help on projects that might be beyond your current skill set. But I think it really helps you to develop as a person, but also within the industry. And so you've really got to be proactive in relation to that. And then I think the final thing that I'll just mention about giving expert evidence at court is that there is lots of information, and everything about it is all about the detail. But I think sort of cutting through all of that, using your expert knowledge and your skill set, you've really got to not be honest to yourself, but to everyone that's around you. And I think that tends to flow down. And again, that relationship as being an expert, giving your honest opinion and not trying to second guess what everybody wants. And that can only come by doing all of that research and just making sure you're upskilling yourself to address all of that.
Definitely. And you made a good point there about how you really have to work on maintaining relationships throughout your career. Often, sometimes it's outside of your day-to-day role. Some practical advice would be great here. How best can you maintain these relationships? Is it a phone call? Is it an email? How do we keep them going?
I think it's a combination, and again, it's looking who your target audience is, and sort of understanding who they are. Some people like to deal with emails, a quick email. A lot of the time, the experts that you sort of deal with, they prefer a phone call because they want to have a quick discussion about larger stuff. And then finally, I find incredibly useful because larger part of the client base, for example, if you're an expert witness, is actually lawyers, and they're going to be the people that are instructing you. So if you get invited to a free seminar about the latest case law on compulsory purchase, go along and do it, because again, you're going to keep those relationships going. And actually, you might only do it once every 6 or 9 months, but it still keeps those relationships active. And I guess it's you've got to know who you're dealing with, what's their best form of communication, how do they like to do it.
Definitely. You've got to be smart about it. You can't do the same approach for everyone, because as we come to see, the property industry is full of so many different careers and so many different types of people. Sarah, if possible, I'd like to pose the question to you. How do you best keep your mentorships and relationships strong at work? And maybe if you're more on the receiving end, what do you appreciate from the younger generation when they reach out to you?
No, I think that's a great question. It's a great point, because in my world, I'm dealing with insurers and my clients every single day, but trying to get the best results from insurers for your clients. There's sort of two different parties need to keep happy, and that is something sort we've discussed internally with sort of obviously with COVID or people just sort of starting out in the industry. It's such a huge part of your role, like who do you know, and the relationships, and exactly to Andrew's point, some people like meeting for a cup of coffee, others will like a lunch or a dinner, but it's very much the small things, just learning, I don't know, tennis, we might take them to a client to a tennis match or something, or if you picked up a conversation that they I don't know, they're into an event or like a particular restaurant. So you sort of little things like that, just to keep or quick check in, a phone call, or how was your weekend? Start the meeting with a little bit of small talk at the start. Don't go straight into that's the problem I find with these Zooms and Teams and all the rest of it. I think through COVID, I think people have lost that ability. Let's have a chat about the weather first. How was the tube? All that mundane chit chat. But that's where personally I learn more about my client or what they're into for those first few minutes at the end, at the start of the meeting and at the end. I think that's so important. So I always try and take, if I go to a meeting, I will always take all junior members of staff, not to sit and do the minutes, because there's no point. I refuse to take someone just to sit and do the minutes. They've got to have a contribution in that meeting. So I'll prep them and give them a little bit before you go. And then they can follow up afterwards and help to build their network that way.
Fantastic. I'm sure probably at the start it might feel quite daunting to them being put into those big meetings, but by the end of it, you've learned so much more than you would simply just in an email chain.
Oh yeah, very much so. And obviously that's where we're all here, or whoever you're working with, it's part of your job to coach, and to train the newer members of the team. You're not going to just throw them under the bus. You're there with them as a team, aren't you? So you're there to help them.
Definitely. And finally, to Guy, I think this might be quite an important one for people. How do you maintain your relationships, having gone from going from retail into sustainability? You may not necessarily have work aligned with people in those teams anymore, but how do you ensure that those relationships stay strong?
I think forming personal connections is important, but also kind of adding value to that relationship is important. So finding out kind of what makes that person or the role that they're in tick, and how can you actually add value to that with your knowledge, your skills, your connections. That's really important. So it can be, some relationships you can just be an irritant because you really want to get to know that person, but you kind of haven't necessarily got anything to add. So I think working out your part in the relationship is very important, but also staying connected is. Once I remember a client saying to me, "Good thing about you is you give me a call just before I want to speak to you because I was about to call you about something," right? So maintaining regular communication is also important. I think physical presence as well. We've been through a period with the pandemic when there were a lot more of these types of calls and communications. They still take place a lot. I run a team all around the world. So actually a lot of the people that I have to get to know through this experience. And but actually being present as well, whether it's in the workplace or at events, learning at events are really good. And I think, Sarah, you just talked to Betsy that some of these can be a bit daunting. Some of the most daunting experiences are the ones where you actually get the most out of them at the end. So I would encourage you to put yourself in that situation. I've got one coming up. So I'm going to COP in December, which is a very, very interesting event to go to. It's a climate event where there's a lot of inspirational people, but I won't know anyone there, right? And I'm there for like 4 days to learn, to network, and to kind of try and add some value. And it's a lonely experience, even for someone who's been around the hood a few times like me. And it's daunting as well, because you have to quickly sort of, explain your role in the finding the solutions. And so some of the most daunting, lonely, sort of scary experiences can also be the ones that can be the most rewarding. Not always. You have to fail sometimes at these things. But so if you turn up at events like a seminar and there are drinks afterwards, and you don't know anyone, the really easy decision is to walk away, right? The more sort of challenging one is stay around, introduce yourself, and, get to meet some other people. There's probably people just like you who are feeling the same. So you can make some good connections. So I'd encourage you to get into those uncomfortable places because you will get a lot more out of it in the end.
Absolutely. I remember my first BPF Futures in-person event. I was so nervous before I walked in the door because I didn't know anyone that was going to be there, and probably wouldn't be in this webinar right now if I hadn't have gone in. So it really can change things. Thank you.
And so just touching on, what Guy had mentioned there in terms of having the support if you do feel slightly isolated, or if you're a newer member entering the industry. BPF Futures did recognise this, and as such launched the mentoring programme in 2021 with a view of connecting junior property professionals with senior peers and leaders across the industry. So it stands to support the personal development of junior members and also allows senior industry professionals to support, encourage and learn from their junior colleagues. It also stands to support the property industry's mission to foster a stronger culture of equality, where ultimately a more diverse range of property professionals will reach our industry's boardrooms and senior decision-making positions in their careers. So this year alone, we have successfully matched 220 applicants, which is a record increase of 25% on the previous year. And we do encourage mentees to meet for a minimum of 6 one-hour meetings between September 2023 to April 2024, although many of our mentors do spend much more time than this and can meet as often as they can allow. The scheme naturally draws to a close in May 2024 before reopening again in the early summer months. And so to the panel, our final question. We're in a couple of months into the process now, and so what advice would you give to our mentees to get the most out of their pairing in the months going forward, and then generally as their careers progress thereafter? If I could direct it to Guy.
So, I don't know what to say to this one, because the mentee that I have been working with is on this call. So, but I think it's really good to sort of ask a lot of questions and to sort of unload a little bit, so that you can get the best guidance and mix it up between calls and in person. Because then you kind of get to know each other a lot better. Don't underestimate that actually it is valuable for both sides. There's a lot of learning to be done on both sides. So there is no stupid question to ask with a mentor. There really isn't. It's a very, very safe space. The people that have volunteered to be mentors do it because they want to help. Honestly, and so I would say, get to know each other, but then from then, really assume it's a safe space, because it's a place where sort of judgment doesn't matter, but advice can do, and be patient as well. I mean, we often think in this world that we want instant gratification for this process, but it sometimes doesn't work like that. It can sometimes take some time. And these mentors and mentees, what's great is, like, and I just responded to someone in the Q&A in the chat, just saying, look, often you think they're there for times of crisis, right? And they are, but it's also can really work on your strengths. And I think that's what we underestimate. We always think, I've got to improve what I'm bad at, right? Well, you can improve what you're good at as well and make it better. So I think it's not just about looking at so-called vulnerabilities, but it's also building on your strengths. But treat it as a safe space, build up that relationship, and then over time you should get value.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Guy. And the same question to Sarah, please.
I very much agree with what Guy said. Actually, I don't think there's a right or a wrong way of doing this, and I think you've got to remember, why have you signed up in the first place? No one's made you. No, it's not a work requirement, or you want to be here. So maybe just go back to basics and saying what would you like out of it, and then how can you get the best out of it. So again, I'm just going to repeat it because it is so important. There is no such thing as a stupid question, and we're here mainly to listen, I think, and we can't give you any of the answers. We can literally just chat through our experiences. And I think for me personally, on with my mentee, we've sort of taken the first couple of sessions as just a bit more relaxed, a little bit of a step back, and just sort of get to know each other. So run through where she is in her career and sort of a history of my career, and then sort of move forward to, you know, what would you like out of it? And I think that's very, very important.
Great, thank you, Sarah. So similarly to what Guy had mentioned, it's probably taking the first initial sessions just to unload and warm up to one another, and as he mentioned, being patient to foster that relationship before you get into the nitty-grittier conversations around career. So finally to you, Andrew, please.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I just echo what everyone else has said, and I think, you know, the mentor is there to help you, so you should use them as much as possible. You know, they're just as busy as everyone else, the mentors, but they give their time to help you, so you should sort of take that and grab that opportunity. When it comes to, there's no such thing as a it's a strange question, you know, that's what these sessions are there for, to work it out, this continual learning process. And really, you know, the mentor can be very objective in life. And again, you know, whilst it may seem very sort of, you know, a personal thing, they can be objective, drawing on their experience, not only as they go forward in their business, but perhaps, you know, like myself, you know, when I had my mentor, and drawing on sort of my experience. And I think the final point is that, you know, you only get out of these relationships what you put in. So if you go in and you have a plan, you know, for every one-to-one meeting that you're having with them, and come prepared, that is going to give you the maximum benefit from that.
Excellent, thank you. So be prepared, have some structure, some clear objectives perhaps that you share at the beginning of each session, and I guess the overall program, so that both parties are confident that those have been fulfilled in essence. So brilliant, thank you so much. The responses have been so insightful. I've scribbled down pages and pages of information and reference points. So thank you again for sharing your experiences.
Yes, thank you so much to the panel. This has been fantastic, and having a National Mentoring Day webinar feels great. I think something I found is this, I feel really quite recharged. I'd quite like to go into next week now, ready to go. You'll probably all be receiving emails from me asking for more mentoring help. We're going to move it now to a quick question Q&A from our members of the audience. If you have any questions, quickly pop them in the chat. We have a first question, which will open it to the panel, from Anamika, saying she's wondering if there is any advice or suggestions that you would have on finding your own mentor rather than a formalised programme. Just quickly, as Cheryl did say, we will have the new applications coming out next year, so keep an eye out for that. But yeah, to the panel, feel free, whoever would like to answer.
I think personally, don't be afraid to just ask at work. It doesn't have to be someone within your team. And a bit similar to what happened to me, I sort of asked, made some inquiries, and then found out that there was a scheme in place. So there may well be something, but it doesn't have to be formal. It doesn't, you know, it could even be, you know, someone else, you know, in a different industry, or someone else that you know, in a different workplace. Doesn't have to be in exactly the same. So I think just don't be afraid to ask, I suppose.
Absolutely, you've got to just put yourself out there, really. It's I think confidence is something that can really separate you from where you are to where you're going. Just you've got to ask.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm just looking in the chat, and I think there's been another question that's been dropped in by Alex. I won't pronounce your surname, but his question is, what tips and tricks would you give your younger self for networking and going to an event on your own? Can I direct that to Andrew, please?
Yeah, I guess it's you know, there's always a guest list. So first thing, look at the guest list, and almost sort of go and sort of seek out, you know, those people that you sort of you need to. And yes, it is very, very daunting when you're at these networking events, and so it's trying to find some sort of common ground and some link with those people, which is easier than you might first think. So again, just sort of looking at that, and again, you know, what I found was sort of quite daunting as you would turn up to these events, and sort of like hundreds of people there. Who do you go and target? And I personally targeted the sort of the larger groups that are having a very, very constructive discussion, and just went and joined and sort of put my foot in and said hello. I'm Andrew, and it sort of started from there. So again, a little bit of the be brave and just go and have a chat with those people.
Absolutely. Just as Betsy just mentioned, it's about being confident and being bold. And I suspect probably everybody else that is at the same networking event probably had a similar feeling as they entered the room or entered the conversation. So it's keeping that in mind and, as you say, grabbing a common thread to sing from. Okay.
Yeah, and if there are specific, I think that's really good advice. If there are specific people you recognise, go and introduce yourself. You use their name as well, and introduce yourself. And I'd say, in other situations, always try and exchange details, exchange contact information. I mean, it used to be business cards, and my first few bosses used to. If I went out the office without business cards, I used to get, in real trouble, actually. But now I'd say I exchange details on LinkedIn a lot more. That's kind of how I keep a network up. It's a really good place to message and keep in touch with people. And so I would say, if you do form a connection, don't leave that conversation without exchanging details or connecting on LinkedIn so that you can follow up the conversation.
Great. So I think we've got 1 minute to 1. So I think we'll wrap things up there. But to the audience, thank you so much for joining. And to the panel, thank you so much for providing some great insight. Happy National Mentoring Day to everyone on the call. And have a great weekend.
Thank you, everyone.